Who are some people you know personally, or otherwise, who ruined their own lives, and how? Meth. Less than 6 months between getting into it and the police pulling his body out of river. A buddy from high school blew through a stop sign and hit a couple of motorcyclists, killing them both. He didn't stop to render aid and fled the scene. He was busted for vehicular manslaughter and spent 12+ years in prison. He's lucky he can work for his dad, because where he lives now is not kind to felons trying to rehabilitate. Staying in bad relationships, doubling down and marrying and having children. Now they have the same relationship problems that they had 10 years ago, but with children involved. I helped an old friend of my mother-in-law for some time. She was in recovery for some years. She had drank so heavily for so long she developed a neurological disorder which left her debilitated. She gradually lost her balance, her motor skills and coordination, and is now hospitalized and unable to care for herself. She is almost a decade younger than me and her life of independence is over. She will remain bedridden and rely on others for her most basic needs for the remaining years of her life. This is neither far-fetched nor the worst-case scenario. People die from addiction every day. Edited. Friend's daughter called in multiple bomb threats to a local high school. She got caught and convicted. She was 18 at the time. So adult record. Took out a mortgage on his house and leveraged all his other assets to go all in on Luna coin. It worked beautifully until it didn't. Over the years we've watched my brother's, now former, best friend ruin his life. It probably started my senior year of HS. I went to a friend's prom and saw him there. Total shock as he's my brother's age. Nearly 8 years older than me. I asked what he was doing there and he said he was taking his girlfriend to prom. That's when and I think my family, found out he was 25 and dating a 17-18-year-old. They continue dating and it's of course not a good relationship. They have a child. She gets a DUI charge with the child in the car. At some point in time he becomes addicted to hard drugs. Friend is struggling in all facets. So my brother gives him a job at his place of work. Friend ends up stealing equipment, both company and personal equipment bought by coworkers. My brother fires him after giving him many chances to come forward and admit what he did. I'm omitting a lot of stuff, but I believe my brother is now NC. Sometimes I'll hear former friend's name mentioned and people will giggle, saying he's still up to his usual shenanigans, doesn't have his life together, etc. One time someone mentioned former friend's name as a scare tactic to get my nephews into doing their homework, like, if you don't work now, you'll end up like him. Quote, I know it makes my brother sad. He tends to be very reserved when talking about this. I remember growing up with this guy and looking up to him almost as a teen. He was very friendly, capable, and outgoing. Always makes that initial HS prom interaction more bizarre and creepy. I knew a few folks in college who got hooked on meth and never pulled themselves out of it. But the funnier story is a guy the first knew in college who stayed in line all night to buy a PS2, which caused him to totally blow off a big lab report, which ultimately meant he had to switch his major. A friend from HS won $1,000 a week for life. Never went to college. Never held down a long-term job. Always worried some lady is trying to take his money by getting pregnant or stealing it through marriage. Has had a very mediocre life without much progression or new relationships. The rest of the friend group used to think he was the luckiest guy alive. Now we all just try to keep his spirits up when we get together and keep our advice to ourselves. He is aware of the solutions to his problems at a 10-mile view, but the $1,000 per week has sapped his will to execute any self-improvement plan. Family member addicted to shopping. Her and her husband made really good money and could have had a very comfortable life. Every single year she decided she didn't like their house, sold at a loss, and then renovated and bought all new designer furniture for every new house. On top of that, she constantly bought multiple pieces of the same designer clothes and jewelry. Why? Art, cosmetic procedures, etc. Eventually they couldn't even get a mortgage anymore and were in an insane amount of debt. Lost their cars and everything else they owned. She ended up stealing her mother's credit card to use for restaurants and attempted to make a bunch of frivolous lawsuits which just resulted in more legal debt. I watched someone convince himself he had been wrong. He was an Iraq veteran and wore it like a badge on his sleeve. Any perceived slight was met with immediately declaring his veteran status and demanding special treatment. He pushed away everyone who tried to help him, kept digging himself deeper and deeper over any perceived slight, real or otherwise. Verbally assaulted those in position to save him. Threw away a career. Threw away a family. All over something that never even happened. He was so convinced the boogeymen were out to get him that he became his own boogeyman. We worked together and I recall the final meeting where we all had our heads together trying to figure out how we could help him. There was so much empathy and sympathy in that room. Then he finally entered, verbal guns blazing, and all we could do was stare at him with our mouths agape. He became his own worst villain and cast his own life into ruins. I think he's a vacuum cleaner salesman in the Deep South now. Edit my response to R. Sorrentinet 914. Here's the deal. Told in a vague way. He had a company vehicle. There was something wrong with the vehicle. He reported this. The vehicle was appropriately added to the maintenance schedule for X date. He continued to report the problem persisting every day, as is proper. Before X date could arrive, his vehicle broke down due to the oft-reported problem. He then decided that he would be blamed for the fault and that his pay would be docked for repairs. This was not the case in the slightest. He had reported the problem, recorded its persistence, and it was merely a case of the vehicle not being able to make it to X date. But he had already decided the facts and outcomes. He verbally assaulted and physically threatened the employee who was in charge of the maintenance cycle, claiming that he had been sabotaged and set up and he deserves better treatment than this. The assaulted employee was not pushing for action. The problem was the dozens of witnesses and that the whole altercation was caught on camera. We all merely wanted to defuse the situation and assure him that no blame was being assigned. He was the one who kept internally escalating the situation, and eventually escalated it beyond where we could do anything when he tracked down the number of and personally called the president of the company to give him a piece of his mind. I'll edit this into the main post. My Phil keeps giving his pathological liar, thief, drug addict son money, to the cost of his savings, his retirement, his house, his marriage, and his relationship with every other family member, including my husband. Twice a month his pension hits, and twice a month his pet psychopath pops up with new, increasingly improbable stories explaining why he needs money this time. Sometimes he doesn't bother asking, just steals it. When my Phil was in the hospital with heart problems, my Bill broke into his bank account and drained it. The truth is drugs. The truth has always been drugs. The truth may someday not be drugs, but it ain't today. My Phil continues to insist that the problem has never been drugs, even when he's calling everyone up begging for money to send him to rehab. My Phil has made it clear that he doesn't care how many other people's savings he may destroy in his quest to never, ever say no to his precious favorite golden baby boy. He used to treat my husband as a human ATM until my husband put his foot down. At that point he pitched a giant screaming public fit and refused to speak to us for over a year. It's sad, don't get me wrong, but also, frankly, as someone who has a husband and a household and a future to protect, fuck that guy. I work in project management for construction. I have seen many apprentices fall into the pit of alcohol, drug addiction within the first couple of years of them being on the job and losing everything. Thankfully, it tends to happen earlier in their life. So some of them are able to recover and bounce back. Others aren't so lucky. Another is my best friend in high school. He became a drug dealer and dropped out before graduating. He eventually got caught on camera selling a couple of kilograms of cocaine to an informant and served several years in prison. I know someone with 8 kids by 7 different guys. All boys. And she still wants a girl. The kids call every new guy, Dad. I'm pretty sure she had 7 kids by the time she was 25. She's in her 30s now. She'll never end up with a decent guy. Poor kids. They all have goofy names that rhyme. I'm talking names that nobody else on the planet has. I knew a guy that ran a scheme that basically printed free money. Here in the Netherlands you have anonymous public transport cards. These cards have unique IDs kinda like credit cards. Unlike credit cards, they were sequential, kinda. So it meant if you had one card, you could guess about 20-30 card numbers. If a card expires, you can claim the money back from the card by typing in its number into a website. What he would do is find cards that had expired, look for the 20-30 cards around it and empty them. The dude made easily 10K plus. It isn't illegal either because of the terms of the anonymous card. The dude ended up dropping out of uni, spending it on a new PC plus VR setup. He then got himself addicted to heroin and I've never heard from him again. Before he found this scheme he was getting his rent paid for by his mom. So I assume he's still in the same place. But the last time I saw him, I'm pretty sure he had no clue what was going on. A spoiled kid from a well-off family in a nearby small town. So big fish in little pond. Around age 20 was having a party at his house. He jokingly pulled an old antique handgun out from a drawer and aimed it at a friend of his. Also maybe around 20 years old. You can guess what happened next. Cousin of mine. Long story. Jill is emo. Mildly intellectually disabled. She always had school issues and the school would send home reports basically saying she was fit only for fast food jobs. My uncle would just chuckle about it. My mom tried talking to him so many times, suggesting trade schools for Jill. When Jill started hanging out with a bad crowd, she tried warning my uncle. He laughed. His kid was 12 and he'd just let her go visit adult cousins of ours with severe drug and alcohol problems for a day or two at a time. Jill started dating at 18. A girl who was 15. You can guess where this went when her dad found out. Jill got a slap on the wrist, but within a week was caught with the girl again, served 2 years in prison and became a sex offender. Jill gets out and has a live-in relationship with a girl from prison. They're both recovering addicts, so they both relapse. At some point, my cousin starts robbing delivery drivers while high, gets caught, is lucky to only get 2 years in prison because my uncle bails her out and gets a great attorney. Gets out, starts dating another addict from prison. Over the next 5 years, steals or borrows over $90,000 from her stepdad. Cycles between living with him and on the street. Girlfriend dies of a stroke. Jill is now mentally ill. She believes her girlfriend has had a baby boy and is in the hospital. Jill talks to her dead girlfriend sometimes. She gets violent with her mom, who is scared of her. Stepdad cycles between wanting to walk out and feeling helpless. They don't know if it's from the years of drugs, schizophrenia, or something else. I don't know what they're doing to help. It's hard to say it's only Jill's fault. This started when she was a child, and all the adults responsible for her ignored warnings. She's had so many chances. She's 36 now, and at this point, probably isn't too far off from an overdose or getting killed in another robbery. My auntie and one of her daughters. They live in a cycle of violence. My auntie got married to a druggy, violent man, had 4 kids. Every single one today deals with trauma. One of her daughters ended up getting in the same trap as her mother. Had 3 kids, all from different fathers. The dads were all involved in crime, drugs. She ended up getting killed by one of the fathers. She was just 32. Her kids now are dealing with the trauma of her loss. Her oldest child was 13 when she died. We're pretty distant, but I feel a lot for them. I went to tech school with a guy. We both got jobs at the same company in the 1980s. We were co-workers in an office job. He was very good, and I expected him to be at least as good as myself in his career. In the early 1990s, he left his wife and just started doing stupid stuff with booze and drugs. He's been in and out of jail since then. That was ruinous enough, but it can always get worse. The real ruining of his life was when he killed his father in 2020. His father had dementia, and my friend was supposed to be his caretaker. With COVID shutting down probation reporting, my friend started drinking again. He got mad at his poor father while drunk and strangled him to death. He was sentenced to 725 years for third-degree murder. I still talk to him from prison. My wife kept someone who attached themselves to her as the best friend. We moved closer to them and everything. Then things unraveled. This friend started off as a bit eccentric, then controlling, then an obvious need to be the center of all attention, then was asked to leave the house. Turned out she was overemphasizing her kids' illnesses, raised thousands to cure him, and ended up in court for scamming people to pay for a holiday she could already afford just for the attention. Ruined her and her family's lives just to be, as the term is now, the main character.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Ericast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.